The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It had only softened into something colder, a gray mist that clung to the cliffs above Hyundai and turned the glass villa into a ghost of itself, all fogged windows and dripping eaves. Do-Hyun stood at the terrace doors with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, watching the water churn below. And thought about the last time he'd felt this particular kind of dread, not fear of losing money or territory or even his life. Those he knew how to calculate, this was different. This was the dread of a man who had, for 4 days, let himself believe that softness might be allowed to stay. Behind him, Amara was still asleep, one arm flung across the pillow where his head should have been, dark curls loose against white linen. He'd watched her for a full minute before he made himself walk away, because if he stood there any longer, he was going to lose the nerve to do the thing he'd promised her he'd do, go to her. Not with threats, with the truth. It sounded simple when she said it. Everything sounded simple in her voice, like the world rearranged itself to be kinder just because she was looking at it. But Do-Hyun had spent 10 years learning that the world did not rearrange itself for anyone, least of all for a woman like Cion, who had spent 3 of those years learning exactly how the Choi family worked from the inside, and who did not lose gracefully. Young was waiting by the car when he came downstairs, tie perfectly straight despite the early hour. Expression carefully arranged into the neutral mask he wore whenever he suspected his employer was about to do something reckless and didn't feel it was his place to stop him. "You don't have to do this in person," Young said. I know what you can send." Do-Hyun pulled his jacket on, movements sharp, economical. "This isn't a business matter. It gets handled in person. With respect, sir, everything about Cion has always been a business matter." That's rather the problem. Do-Hyun didn't answer that, because it was true, and because the truth of it was exactly why he was going. 3 years of contracts and introductions and understanding, as Cion liked to call it, 3 years of treating a relationship like a merger, of never once letting anyone, including himself, forget that it was strategic. He'd told himself for a long time that this was simply what men like him were allowed, alliances instead of attachments. Now that he knew the difference, now that 4 days with a stranger in red silk had shown him exactly how large the gap between those two things really was, he owed Cion the truth. Even if the truth was going to cost him. Cion's penthouse looked, as it always had, like something curated for a magazine spread that would never actually be published. White marble, black steel. A single orchid on the entry table that the staff replaced every 3 days, whether it needed it or not. She was standing at the window when he came in, unannounced, because he still had a key from an arrangement neither of them had ever bothered to formally end. She didn't turn around right away. "I wondered how long it would take you," she said. "I assumed grief would slow you down more than it has. 4 days with the artist and already you're storming penthouses again." "How refreshing, Cion." "Don't." She turned then and her face was composed, flawless. The practiced calm of a woman who had learned early that the first person to show emotion in a negotiation had already lost. "Don't come in here and try to be gentle with me. It's insulting. Say what you came to say." He'd rehearsed it on the drive over, something careful. Something that acknowledged what they'd built together without pretending it had ever been what she wanted it to be. Looking at her now, all of it evaporated, and what was left was simply the truth, blunt and unadorned, the only currency he had left to offer her. "It's over. It's been over longer than either of us wanted to admit. I should have said it months ago instead of letting it drift, and that's on me. But it's over, and it has nothing to do with Amara. It has everything to do with Amara." Cion's voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was the terrifying part about her, the way rage came out of her sounding exactly like calm. 10 years, Do-Hyun. 10 years you spent making sure nothing could touch you, and I respected that. I built around it. I never once asked you to be someone you weren't, because I understood what the accident took from you. And in 4 days, a woman who sells jewelry at a market stall walks into a ballroom and undoes all of it. And you have the nerve to stand in my home and tell me it isn't about her. "You never asked me to change," he said quietly, "because you never wanted me to. It worked better for you if I stayed exactly the way I was. Contracts don't need affection. Understanding doesn't need trust. I let you build that because it was easier than admitting I didn't know how to offer anything else. That's my failure, not yours." But I'm not going to apologize for finally learning how. Something flickered across her face, not hurt exactly, because she didn't allow herself hurt where anyone could see it. But something adjacent to it, quick and gone. So this is a kindness, she said. You've come to tell me the truth as a kindness. I came because you deserved better than finding out from a hashtag. How generous. She turned back to the window. And when she spoke again, her voice had dropped its warmth entirely, gone flat and precise as a blade laid on a table. Do you know what I gave up building this understanding of ours, offers, other men who would have married me the ordinary way, with flowers and photographs and mothers crying at the altar? I turned all of it down because I believed I was building something more durable than romance. Something that couldn't be undone by a song and a stranger's perfume. Cion, I'm not finished. She faced him again, and now there was nothing composed left in her expression at all. Just a decade of careful architecture, crumbling in real time. You want to know who leaked that footage? Ask your head of security. He already knows. I'm not going to pretend I didn't want the city to see exactly what you'd thrown away 3 years for. But I want you to understand something, and I want you to hear it clearly, because I will only say it once. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the same expensive, cold perfume she'd always worn, nothing like cedar and orange peel, nothing like warmth. That footage was a courtesy, a warning shot. I have 3 years of access to this family, to shipping manifests, to accounts that don't exist on paper. To men who owe you favors and men who are waiting for exactly this kind of opening to stop pretending they don't hate you. I know where every one of your weaknesses is buried, Do-Hyun, because I spent 3 years cataloging them for a future I thought we were building together. You didn't just end a relationship this morning. You told a woman who knows exactly how to hurt you that she no longer has any reason to hold back. The silence that followed had weight to it. The particular stillness of a room where 2 people have just heard the true shape of a threat for the first time. Is that supposed to frighten me? Do-Hyun said finally, or is it a confession? It's a fact. Cion smoothed the front of her blazer, composure sliding back over her face like a curtain falling. Enjoy your artist while you can. I give it 3 weeks before the city eats her alive, and I intend to be standing close enough to enjoy watching it happen. He left without another word. Because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't have made things worse. And because the only thing that mattered now was getting back to the villa before the storm she'd promised arrived faster than he expected. Amara woke to an empty bed and the smell of burnt coffee, which told her everything she needed to know about how the morning had gone even before she found the note on the kitchen counter in Do-Hyun's precise, slanted handwriting. Gone to end it properly, back by noon, don't leave the villa, not a leash, a promise. D. She read it twice, smiled despite herself at the not a leash, a promise, and then spent the next several hours doing exactly what she'd told him she wouldn't do, which was pace. Ron called at 11, video chat propped against a mug of tea. Amara wasn't drinking any more than Do-Hyun had drunk his coffee. The internet has opinions, Ron said, without preamble. Have you seen the comments? I have deliberately not seen the comments. Good instinct. There's a whole thread calling you a gold digger, one calling you a spy, and my personal favorite, 3 separate people convinced you're secretly his long-lost cousin, which frankly, I think is worse than the other 2 combined. Ron, I'm trying to make you laugh. Is it working? A little. Amara pulled her knees up to her chest, curling into the corner of the villa's enormous white sofa, feeling suddenly very small in a house built for a man who was used to being alone in it. It's not the comments, it's Ron. There was a woman at that club, Cion. She used to be with him, some kind of arrangement, and she looked at me like she already knew exactly how this ends. Like she'd seen it before and was just waiting for me to catch up. Do you believe her? Amara thought about it honestly, which was rarer for her than she liked to admit. She thought about Do-Hyun humming off-key over the coffee maker, about the bracelet he'd kept turning over in his hands instead of just returning it. About the particular kind of quiet that had settled over him on the terrace when he told her about the bombing, not performative grief, not a story rehearsed for sympathy, but a man finally setting down something he'd carried alone for a decade because he trusted her enough to help hold it. No, she said finally, I don't think she's right about him. I think she's furious that he changed for someone else and never changed for her. And I think furious people say true-sounding things because it's the fastest way to make someone else feel as unsteady as they do. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't scare me a little. Scared how? Scared that loving someone like him means signing up for a war I didn't start. Ron was quiet for a moment. Uncharacteristically serious. For what it's worth, he said finally, you've never once in the 11 years I've known you backed away from something because it was hard. You back away from things because they're boring. This is the least boring thing that's ever happened to you. Amara laughed, surprised into it. That is deeply unhelpful advice. I'm an artist's assistant, not a therapist. Also, I ate your fish cakes. Sorry. Ron, someone's at your door, he said, glancing at something off screen. Well, his door, the estate door. There's a car. Amara's stomach dropped before her brain caught up to why. Some animal instinct recognizing danger a half-second before reason did. She moved to the window in time to see, not Do-Hyun's car, but a sleek black sedan she didn't recognize pulling through the villa's outer gate, a gate that, as far as she knew, only opened for exactly 2 people. The woman who stepped out was not Cion. She was younger, sharply dressed in the kind of understated gray that suggested competence rather than wealth. And she moved with the brisk efficiency of someone used to delivering information nobody wanted. Miss Bello, she stopped a respectful distance from the terrace, hands folded. My name is Hana. I work with Mr. Choi's security team. He asked me to check on you directly. He's been delayed. Delayed how? Hana hesitated, just long enough that Amara's stomach dropped a second time. There's been an incident at the harbor. Nothing involving him directly, she added quickly, seeing Amara's face. A shipment was seized this morning under circumstances that suggest inside information that only a handful of people would have had access to. Mr. Choi is dealing with it personally. He wanted you to know he's safe, and he wanted me here in case Cion decided the harbor wasn't enough. Hana didn't answer that directly, which was itself an answer. He'll be back by evening. He asked that you not leave the property until then. Amara wanted badly to argue, to point out that she had survived plenty of things without a security detail. That she refused to be managed like cargo even by proxy. But the memory of Do-Hyun's face the night he'd said you're the only thing in 10 years I've actually been afraid of losing kept the protest lodged somewhere in her throat. This wasn't him trying to own her. This was him, for the first time in a decade, actually letting someone see that he was frightened and asking, however clumsily, for her to let him keep her safe while he handled it. Fine, she said finally, but I want real information, not a security briefing. What actually happened? Hana glanced toward the water, weighing how much to say, then seemed to decide Amara had earned better than a corporate summary. The Choi family's legitimate shipping operation runs through 3 ports. This morning, customs at the primary port received an anonymous tip about falsified manifests, the kind of tip that requires very specific internal knowledge to make convincingly. It wasn't true, not exactly, but it was close enough to the truth to force an investigation, and investigations cost the family money, time. And worse, attention from people who have been waiting a long time for an excuse to look closely at how the Choi operation actually runs. Cion, I couldn't say who, Hana said carefully. In the tone of someone who absolutely could say who and had simply been told not to. But Mr. Choi has a theory and he's not being subtle about pursuing it. He came back at dusk, jaw tight, tie loosened. Looking like a man who had spent the day holding a war at bay through sheer force of will. Amara met him at the door before Hana could announce him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. She just wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his shoulders slowly incrementally give way, the way ice gives way to water if you're patient enough to wait for the thaw. You should be angrier at me, he said into her hair. This is what she meant. This is the first move. I'm not angry at you. She pulled back enough to look at him. I'm angry at her. There's a difference, and I need you to actually hear it. Because I get the feeling you're about to spend the rest of tonight blaming yourself for something you didn't do. I ended things badly enough that this became a possibility. You ended things honestly, which is apparently a crime punishable by customs investigations in this city. She took his hand and led him inside. Because standing in the doorway arguing about blame felt like giving Cion exactly the kind of chaos she wanted. Tell me what happened at the harbor, all of it. No summarized version, no protecting me from the parts you think will scare me. So he told her about the seized shipment, about the customs official who'd received the tip, and the very specific details it had contained. Details that could only have come from someone who'd once had legitimate access to the Choi family's internal ledgers. About Young's face when he confirmed that Shin's driver had, in fact, been seen near the port 2 nights earlier. The same driver who'd been seen near the villa's cliff rode the night the footage was taken. About the 6 hours it had taken to smooth things over with customs, 6 hours of favors called in and old debts collected, 6 hours during which Do-Hyun had realized, with a clarity that frightened him, exactly how much of his empire's stability depended on nobody testing it too hard at once. "She's not trying to destroy the business," he said finally. "Not yet. This was small, contained. A message? What kind of message? That she can reach into the machinery of my life whenever she wants, and I won't always be able to stop her in time." He rubbed a hand over his face. And for a moment he looked less like the quiet blade the city feared, and more like exactly what he was, a man exhausted by 10 years of vigilance, who'd finally let his guard down and was now paying the price for it. The old version of me would have already ended this, quietly, permanently. That's what the accident taught me, that mercy is a liability, that the moment you let something threatening live, it comes back twice as sharp. Amara went very still. "And the new version of you," he looked at her for a long moment, something raw and uncertain moving behind his eyes. "The new version of me doesn't want to become someone you'd have to be afraid of, even to protect you. I don't know how to hold both of those things at once. I've never had to try. Then we figure it out together," she said simply, like it really was that easy. Like a decade of accumulated fear and violence could be talked through over cold tea on a rainy terrace. You don't have to become the man from before the accident to protect what you have now. You just have to be smarter than she's counting on. She thinks softness makes you predictable. Prove her wrong. Be soft with me and sharp with her. Those aren't the same muscle. Something in his expression shifted, not quite relief, not quite hope, but something adjacent to both. The particular look of a man being handed a way forward he hadn't been able to find on his own. "You make it sound like strategy. It is strategy. I just dress it up nicer than you do." She managed a small, tired smile. "Also, for the record, I'm not leaving because a woman with a driver and a grudge decided to inconvenience your customs officials. I've dealt with worse than Cion. I once had a gallery owner try to blacklist me across an entire city because I turned down his terrible investment offer. I know how people like her operate. They need an audience. Don't give her one and half her power disappears." The next several days passed in a strange, watchful quiet, the kind that exists in the space between a warning shot and whatever comes after it. Do-Hyun doubled security around the villa without making it feel like a cage, a distinction Amara noticed and appreciated more than she said out loud. Young ran a discreet internal audit of the Choi shipping ledgers, tightening every point of access Cion might still theoretically have. And Amara, restless in the way she always was when she couldn't move freely through a city, threw herself into the one thing that had always steadied her: work. She set up a small studio space in one of the villa's unused rooms. Torch and metal and the particular controlled chaos of her craft spreading across a table that had probably never held anything less refined than imported flowers. Do-Hyun found her there on the third evening, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, entirely absorbed in bending a length of copper wire into something that hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. "You look happy," he said, leaning in the doorway. "I look occupied, which is the closest I get to happy when I'm not allowed to leave the property." She glanced up, though, and softened. "But yes. Also happy, this helps. Making something with my hands reminds me the world is bigger than whatever's currently trying to scare me." He crossed the room and picked up one of her finished pieces from the table, a small pendant. Fire forged, the metal folded in on itself in a way that caught the light strangely, like it hadn't fully decided to hold still. "What's this one?" "That one's called Survivor's Luck. I made it after my mother died. It's not supposed to be pretty. It's supposed to look like something that went through fire and came out changed instead of destroyed." She watched him turn it over in his hands, the same careful, searching way he'd once turned over her bracelet, and something in her chest went soft and unguarded. You could use one of those, honestly. A reminder that going through the fire doesn't mean you have to come out the same shape you went in. Is that an offer? It's an observation. But if you want it to be an offer, I could be persuaded. He didn't answer with words. He set the pendant down, careful, deliberate, and crossed the last few feet between them, and when he kissed her, it wasn't the careful, restrained thing it had been on the dance floor. It was 10 years of stored-up stillness finally breaking, unhurried but absolute. His hands finding her waist like he'd been waiting his whole adult life to be allowed to want something this simply, this completely. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing unsteady in a way she'd never once seen him allow himself in public. I don't know how to do this slowly, he admitted quietly. Everything about my life has taught me to move fast before someone takes the thing I want. I'm trying not to do that to you. You're allowed to want things fast, she said, as long as you're honest about it. I'd rather have a man who tells me he's scared of losing me than one who pretends he isn't feeling anything at all. I've had quite enough of that particular type this week. He laughed, a real one, low and surprised, the fourth one she'd counted since the ballroom, though she'd long since stopped needing to keep score. It was 2 nights later that the second message arrived, and this one wasn't subtle at all. Amara was in the studio, finishing a bracelet she'd been threatening to make him since the villa, when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. No greeting, no context, just a single photograph and beneath it 3 words, "Your friend's fine for now." The photograph showed Ron, unmistakably Ron, standing outside their hotel in Atlanta, not Busan, Atlanta, thousands of miles away. Which meant whoever had taken it either had reached far beyond the city or had simply purchased the image from someone who did. Either way, the message was unmistakable. I can touch anyone you love, anywhere, whenever I choose. Amara's hands went cold around the phone. She didn't scream, didn't panic in any way that showed on the outside. Years of standing in rooms full of people who wanted to see her rattled had trained that reaction out of her, but inside, something that had been steady since the ballroom finally, briefly, cracked. She found Do-Hyun in the study, going over shipping documents with Young, and set the phone down on the desk between them without a word. He read it once, and the temperature of the room changed instantly. She watched the quiet blade surface fully for the first time since she'd met him. Watched a decade of careful control resettle over his features like armor being buckled into place. "Get eyes on Ron immediately," he told Young, voice flat, precise, terrifyingly calm. "Local team, not ours, someone who won't spook whoever's watching him. And find out who has the reach to photograph someone in Atlanta on 4 hours' notice. That's not Shin's usual circle. That means she's called in help." Young was already moving, phone to his ear before he'd cleared the doorway. Do-Hyun turned to Amara, and for a moment the mask slipped just enough to show her the fear underneath it, not for himself, she realized, but entirely for her. And for the people she loved, who had never asked to be pulled into any of this. "I told you," he said quietly, "I told you this is what it means. I can end this tonight, permanently, the way I would have a year ago. Or I can keep trying to be the man you asked me to become and hope it's fast enough." Amara's hands were still shaking, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "You keep trying to become that man," she said, "because if you go back to the old way, she wins something bigger than a fight. She proves that softness never had a chance in the first place. I won't let her have that." She swallowed hard, looking at the photograph still glowing on the phone screen. "But Do-Hyun, I need you to protect Ron, whatever that takes." "I mean it, it's already happening," he said, and for the first time since she'd met him. She believed completely that the quiet blade and the man who hummed off-key over burnt coffee were not 2 separate people fighting for control of the same body, but one man learning, in real time, how to be both at once, soft enough to love her without flinching, and sharp enough to make sure loving her didn't cost either of them everything. Outside, the storm that had been threatening the coastline for days finally broke, rain hammering the glass in long, relentless sheets, and somewhere across the city. In a penthouse with a single orchid replaced every 3 days whether it needed it or not, Cion watched her phone for a reply that hadn't come yet, and smiled the thin, patient smile of a woman who had all the time in the world and intended to use every second of it. The dance floor had been quiet, what came now would not be. And neither Do-Hyun nor Amara yet understood that Cion's opening move, the harbor, the photograph, the reach that stretched all the way to Atlanta, was only the first note of a much longer, much darker song, one she had been composing for 3 patient years, and had no intention of stopping until the entire city remembered exactly whose empire this had always truly been.